It's a cool autumn morning, a day like any other, when the unthinkable happens. A small town's peace is shattered. Hidden beneath layers of soil, forgotten by time, a grave was about to be unearthed. But this wasn't just any grave. This was a grave that had been untouched for decades, its existence buried along with the secrets it held. But what was even more chilling was the discovery made when the grave was opened, something that shouldn't have been there. Something that posed a question. How did this happen? For years, the residents of Old Hollow Creek had heard rumors. Whispers of an unsolved disappearance from decades ago. But no one had ever dared to investigate the old cemetery. That is, until one determined man, Detective Robert Hale, made a fateful decision to dig deeper into the town's haunted past. What he discovered beneath the earth would set off an investigation that would disturb the very core of Old Hollow Creek, shaking the very foundations of a community that thought it had long buried its secrets. Old Hollow Creek is a quaint, sleepy town nestled deep in the countryside, where the air always carries a scent of earth and wood, and the streets are often quiet, save for the sound of birds. Its residents go about their lives without much fanfare, tending to their gardens, working the farms, and keeping to themselves. On the outside, it's a picture of serenity, a town lost in time. The cemetery, hidden at the edge of town, was an old place, weathered, forgotten, with tombstones that seemed to tilt and crumble with every passing year. The graveyard was overrun with ivy and moss, the ground soft and damp, as if the earth itself was unwilling to let go of its past. But this is where the mystery begins. It's here, among the quiet tombstones, that Detective Hale uncovered an unsettling anomaly, an untouched grave that had been closed and sealed for decades. The dirt around it wasn't disturbed. It was like the grave had been left there, as though someone or something had deliberately kept it hidden. The grave belonged to a man named Daniel Clarke, a young man who disappeared without a trace in 1969. He had been a local schoolteacher, well-liked, with no known enemies. His vanishing had shaken the town to its core. And yet, in all these years, there had been no trace of him. His disappearance was never solved, and over time, the case was buried, like so many cold cases, and forgotten by most. But now, as Detective Hale peered at the old grave marker, something wasn't right. The grave was pristine, untouched. No erosion, no wear from time. It was as if it had been left there, frozen in place, waiting for someone to uncover the truth. But what was that truth? And what was it about Daniel Clarke's disappearance that no one had ever talked about? The detective's fingers trembled slightly as he read the old inscription on the gravestone. Daniel Clarke, 1942-1969. Gone, but never forgotten. It seemed so simple. But it wasn't. Hale knew that there was more to this story than a mere disappearance. There was something buried in this grave, something the town had never dared to face. The more Hale dug into Clarke's past, the stranger things became. Daniel Clarke hadn't just been a teacher. He had been involved in a project, a secret government project, buried deep beneath the town's quiet existence. But the project, codenamed Project Apollo, was something no one had ever been told about. It wasn't until Hale started speaking to the older residents that the whispers of the past came to life. They spoke of strange occurrences, of government officials visiting Clarke's house before he disappeared, and of secretive conversations in hushed tones. As Hale dug deeper into the mystery, the clues grew stranger. He found old records of Clarke's involvement with a top-secret program. The records were sealed and classified, but with enough persistence, Hale uncovered them. The project, Project Apollo, was focused on human experimentation. Specifically, it involved researching ways to manipulate memory and control human behavior. Clarke had been one of the key researchers in this project, although the details were vague. In Hale's mind, everything was pointing toward one inevitable conclusion. Clarke's disappearance wasn't voluntary. He had been taken, perhaps even erased. The government had found a way to make people disappear, but not just physically. They had erased their identities, wiped them from records, as if they never existed. But why? Why had they targeted Daniel Clarke, and why had they buried his grave in such an obscure way? Had he been involved in something he shouldn't have known about? Or was he simply an innocent man caught in the middle of a covert operation gone wrong? The investigation took Hale back to the cemetery. With the town's cooperation, the detective had the grave exhumed. The site where Daniel Clarke had been buried for decades held another unsettling secret. When the casket was opened, Hale found not just the remains of a man long dead, but also a series of strange artifacts tucked inside. Old photographs, documents, and a small, locked box. The photos were of Clarke in his youth, standing beside figures Hale didn't recognize. But there was one detail that chilled him to his core. One of the figures appeared in multiple photos. A man whose face was blacked out in every image. The locked box, however, was the most troubling discovery. Hale took it back to his office, but despite his best efforts, the box wouldn't open. It was locked with no visible keyhole, and no tools seemed capable of breaking its seal. The mysterious box became an obsession for Hale. Whatever was inside, he knew it was connected to the reason why Clarke had vanished. And whatever was in the box, it was something nobody in Old Hollow Creek was ever meant to know. As Hale delved deeper, he began to feel the weight of the investigation on his shoulders. The town began to grow more and more restless. The community that had once been so tight-knit now started to unravel. People started coming forward with strange stories. Old residents began recalling whispers of a man they hadn't seen in decades, a man who seemed to know everything about them, even their darkest secrets. It was clear that the town, once so peaceful, had been living with a long-held secret, one they had kept buried. Hale's investigation was shaking the very foundation of Old Hollow Creek's comfortable, quiet existence. The families who had lived there for generations began to turn on each other, suspicious of anyone who might know too much about the past. But Hale was undeterred. Every step he took uncovered more dark details about Clarke's life, about the project he had been involved with, and about the people who were involved in erasing him from history. Things took a turn when Hale received an anonymous tip. The voice on the other end of the phone was calm, but its words carried a chilling weight. The truth about Daniel Clarke will ruin you. You're digging into something you don't understand. Stop now, before it's too late. The message was clear. Someone didn't want Hale to uncover the truth. But by this point, the detective is even more focused. He knew he was getting closer, and the closer he got, the more dangerous the situation became. Then, everything changed when Hale discovered the final piece of the puzzle. The locked box, after days of trying, had finally been opened. Inside was a single yellow document, a letter addressed to Daniel Clarke from an unknown sender. The letter was a confession, an apology for what had happened, but it was also a threat. The sender claimed responsibility for Clarke's disappearance, revealing that the town had been part of an experiment and Clarke had been the first test subject. But what was most unsettling was the final sentence. You were never meant to be remembered. You were erased for a reason. We will continue this experiment, and it will never stop. The investigation reached a breaking point. Hale had uncovered the truth, but it was a truth that left him shaken to his core. Daniel Clarke's disappearance wasn't just a tragic event. It was part of a much larger, more sinister plan. The town of Old Hollow Creek had been the site of a government experiment that had manipulated time, erased people from history, and left families torn apart. And Daniel Clarke had been the first victim. But as Hale confronted the people behind the experiment, he realized the shocking truth. The conspiracy wasn't just about the past, it was about the future. And as long as the secret of Old Hollow Creek remained hidden, the experiment would continue, claiming more victims, more families, more lives. The mystery of Daniel Clarke's disappearance had been solved. But the mystery of what had really happened to him, that, it seemed, would remain buried.